This is a really exciting time for all of us, for the Cincinnati 2030 district and this community that's been working to create and launch this session. So just a little bit today, we're the Cincinnati 2030 district, and I'm Elizabeth Rojas. The 2030 district is an initiative of Green Umbrella here locally in Cincinnati. And our goals are to reduce energy, water, and transportation 50% by the year 2030. And in Cincinnati, we have pioneered an innovative new model that is focused on occupant health. So that is our fourth pillar. There are 23 districts throughout the North America, and most of those are in the US. And we are relatively new to this space. So it's a really great thing to see all the folks that have been engaged with this program. So I'm going to, let's see, wanted to say thank you to our volunteers and sponsors. There's a lot of volunteers that have worked very hard to not just help the 2030 district, but also to craft this occupant health pillar. So we'll hear a little bit more about the guide and some of the aspects of that when we get into the session. But today we're joined by Amy Malmstrom with BHDP, who has been a dedicated volunteer with the organization. I'll hand it over to you, Amy.
Perfect. Thank you, Elizabeth. Can everyone hear me okay? Good. Yes. Perfect. Well, yeah, I'm Amy Malmstrom. I'm with BHDP Architecture. I'm an architect with the office here in Cincinnati and also the director of interior design for our office. I've had a passion for health and wellness for a number of years, kind of starting with sustainability and then just allowing that to continue to foster. So I'm really excited to be here and to talk with our team here a little bit more. So I just want to introduce Jessica next.
Hi everyone, I'm Jessica Glorius-Dangelo. I'm with MA Architects in Cincinnati. I am sustainability coordinator and project coordinator in this office. And I have been heavily involved in the 2030 district, especially the occupant health pillar, for the better part of 2.5 years, I think, working on this guide and the pillar. So it's wonderful to be here talking to you all.
Perfect. And then I wanted to introduce our guest speaker, John Scott. So John has an extensive workplace design experience with a wide range of client and project types over the last 23 years. His background includes interior design with prominent A&D firms in Chicago, as well as Grand Rapids, Michigan. In both of his past positions, John has developed strong expertise in the areas of workplace strategy, organizational culture, and design development. As a knowledge leader on Haworth's Ideation team, John's focus is on the translation of workplace research into conceptual design recommendations. His role is to help clients understand the linkages between design and business performance and to explore how new ways of working impact cultural and organizational change. He's an NCIDQ qualified practitioner, a Fitwell ambassador, and of course, a LEED accredited professional. So welcome, John.
Thanks, Amy. Appreciate it.
So just want to remind everybody that this is an AIA approved course. So if you do need HSW credit, let us know and we will make sure to get you a certificate. We have a lot to learn today, so we're just going to go ahead and jump right in. I'm going to hand it over to John.
Excellent. Quickly get us into our, can everyone see my screen okay? Silence is golden. All right, well, welcome everyone. Happy last day of September, which is kind of crazy to think about. We're getting ready into fall, but today we really wanted to share a little bit more around brain science and nature. And so we've divided this piece up into a couple of different sections. This first section is really looking at two different behaviors that often when it comes to creative thinking, it's what's necessary for innovation. So it's high focus work and restorative activities. And so we'll talk about those two and what takes place in our brains in order to help us to do those types of activities well. certainly without rest, we're unable to focus. And of course, when we lack the ability to interact and collaborate with others, we often miss out on really new ideas and ultimately fail to execute on them. So the first bit of this, we'll talk a little bit about the brain science that takes place when it comes to developing new ideas. And then the second piece is really looking at understanding the strong connection that humans have and need to the outdoors. And so, all of the great benefits that Mother Nature provides, we need to leverage that in three specific ways, and we'll talk about those. And so what's unfortunate is we spend most of our time, though, or most of our waking hours indoors. So there's a call to action coming up. Perhaps we need to step out and leverage the outdoors more. Perhaps we should have done this outdoors, but maybe not. So let's take a look at the creative rhythm that takes place in our brain when we're developing new ideas, and also how access to nature can actually provide both physical, mental, and professional benefits for everyone. So let's jump right in. Before we get too far, though, I do want to pose a question or a small favor. So if you could, if you have a calculator nearby, or perhaps just a scrap of paper, I want you to do this. So please multiply your current age by 0.9. And I have to put current age because everyone kept using 29 before. So I know it's easy to do. Take your current age, multiply that by 0.9, and that number, just save that number off to the side. We'll reference that a little bit later. So current age times 0.9, save that. So creativity and innovation, they're the same things, right? Well, actually, they're not. They're as research, they're not the same thing. The two can often be confused or interchanged with one another, but they're actually two separate concepts that work together. And so both of them together are defined by novelty and usefulness. So it's about finding a new or novel idea, and then is that valued by others? Is it useful by others? So if you come up with a new idea, but it's not really useful, that idea sort of dissipates. It doesn't really do much. And if you have an idea that's already been developed or identified and is useful, again, it's not new. It's not novel. It's already been done. So the magic is really finding that new novel idea. And is that idea actually something that others can use or helps benefit them in some way? So the definitions behind these two are a little bit different. So creativity is actually the process of coming up with new and useful ideas. Innovation is the process of turning that idea or ideas into a reality for others to use. And so that's really the difference between creativity and innovation. There are also a couple of myths that we'll dispel today about creativity and that we'll explore here now. So in the past, certain people would be referred to as, oh, you're very right brain because you're very creative, or you're very left brain because you're very analytical. It's interesting that we're now discovering that creativity is not just a right brain feature. It involves the whole brain. Scientists can actually map out and study the brain and track the flow of blood. There's actually a 2% surge of blood in a certain part of the brain when an idea occurs. And so it's really interesting that they're able to actually track that. But creativity actually it involves the whole brain. The other interesting myth is that there are not just special individuals who have been blessed with a gift of creativity. It's something it is a skill that can be developed and practiced by anyone. So the beautiful thing here is that we all have the capacity to be creative, and it just takes work. It takes time to develop and nurture that, but it's not just a special few, it's all of us together. So the brain science behind creativity is really quite fascinating. So for all the neuroscientists out there, this is where they'll get really giddy and excited. But the creative rhythm that takes place really is about convergent thinking and divergent thinking. And there's a specific process our brains go through when we are trying to develop ideas. And so it usually starts out with this idea of preparing or preparation of information. So this is when you're starting out, you're learning a new language, so it takes time to learn. You have to study, you have to gather intel. It's all about how to learn something new, and you're really trying to work towards the mastery of that topic. That's really essential. So this period of time can really fluctuate depending on, I would say, the scale of difficulty of what you're trying to learn, of what you're trying to develop. It's different for each unique individual. So there's not a specific time frame that this can take place, and it can be quite long. But at the end of this period of time, this is often where we find the next stage kicks in. This is what's called incubation, and so this is often where we will go off and do something. Oftentimes this happens when we're sleeping or doing something unexpected. Our brains will continue to work, and they will take that information that it has learned, and it will start to integrate and organize those new learnings with what we already know. And at times, it will start to make connections across different concepts, and this will usually then quickly lead us into the next stage, which is insight, or what's called a flash of insight, or it's even sometimes characterized as the light bulb above one's head, the aha moment, right? So when you have that aha moment, that flash of insight, this is when something new has been discovered or something that's been uncovered. So this can happen very quickly. It can also disappear very quickly. So if you don't capture that idea or do anything with it quickly, you'll lose it. So the last stage is then going into what's called verification. And this is often where we'll start to take that idea, we'll evaluate it, we'll elaborate on it until it finally reaches its final form. But that idea will evolve over time, and certainly it might even fail just because it's, again, not novel, maybe it's not useful, so on. But that is all part of this development, and then it will cycle through this entire creative process again. So convergent and divergent thinking are really two different ways of working. The convergent thinking is where we're doing heads down focus, heavy concentration work. Distractions are not good doing this type of thinking. And so we tend to want to isolate ourselves and put ourselves in an environment that allows us to do that. And then divergent thinking is where we actually want to be very open to our world and, connect with others. And this is why we're at rest and doing things perhaps unexpected. So there's this heads down, heads up way of thinking behind these two different ways of working. The other interesting thing is we have three different networks that are happening in our brain. We have what's called this executive network, we have the default network, and then we have what's called the Salience Network. And each three of these are quite unique and work in different ways. The first one, the executive network, we call this a top-down process. Again, this is really what is happening in the prefrontal cortex of our, the front of our melons. This is what's happening when we're trying to manage time. We're trying to plan and organize trips or events or projects or people. It's about remembering details. This is what we are using when we're learning new information, new languages, something brand new. This is what we're using when we're trying to solve complex problems. All of these things really require a great deal of focus, or what we call high attentional control. Doing this in a very loud, spontaneous, or high energy space can sometimes be problematic because we oftentimes will easily get distracted or will not sort of achieve what we're hoping to. Trying to learn a new language while sitting on a beach down in the Caribbean, probably not going to work so well. There's probably going to be too many distractions at play. So the executive network is really, again, a lot of the prefrontal cortex of our brain. This is what we're using when we're doing this executive network. The default network, which is interesting, it's really the rest of the brain. The default mode network is really everything that's not the prefrontal cortex. Scientists, when they were early on researching the brain. They thought the most important features only happened in the prefrontal cortex. And when the brain wasn't using that part of the brain, they thought, oh, well, the brain is going in default. It's in default mode. And so that's why they call it the default network. But what we're now seeing, or what we're now recognizing, is that this default network is actually, hopefully the name will be changing, but it's really now the imagination network, because this is where a lot of creativity and whatnot is drawn from this part of the brain. So the default network, these functions include empathy. This is how we remember the past and are imagining the future. This is where we have episodic memory and where daydreaming occurs. Oftentimes, this usually it occurs when we're at rest. Sometimes when we're sleeping, or just interacting with others, or taking a break, maybe even going for a walk. These things that allow us to recharge our batteries. This is usually where we have what's called low attentional control. And it's also been said that maybe this is when the brain goes on autopilot and sort of takes a break. Well, it's not really taking a break. It's still working behind the scenes, but it's not working quite as hard. And so again, using that incubation and insight, this is where we're connecting the dots and finding new ideas. And then finally, the last network, this is what's called the Salience Network. I really think of this as a HEPA filter. So it's filtering in different stimuli that supports the work that we're trying to do, but also is blocking irrelevant stimuli that we don't need. So stimuli, both internal and external. It could be internal things like our existing thoughts, that to-do list that's never quite ever accomplished, daydreaming, emotions, recalling memory, and then external stimuli like sight, sound, smells, taste, touch, things that are in our world that we may not need. But for instance, when we're in that convergent thinking, we're high focus, concentrating, you may not even recognize that your neighbor's dog is barking. It's happening, but the Salience Network is blocking that because it's learning that that's irrelevant to what the task at hand is all about. All of a sudden, if there are flashing lights and sirens, all of a sudden that's going to allow that stimuli in, because it's a warning trigger. It's something you need to respond to. So that's a good thing that it's letting in. But this network is constantly working to help figure out what you need and what you don't need. And these three networks together help us when it comes to developing new ideas. There was a German study done a few years ago where they asked a number of people, where do you get your best ideas? And at the same time, what are you doing? And usually when we do this and are together, this is where I'll throw the question out and have different people sort of respond. But what's interesting was the number one idea, or the number one thing that where people got their best ideas and what they were doing. Number one was showering, or in the shower, and it was 72% actually were doing this. And it's interesting to think about, because when we are in the process of getting in the shower, it's a very comfortable thing. It's warm, it's relaxing. We know where things are. We can sort of do things without planning out how to shower and mapping out what it looks like. It's a enjoyable experience, right? So this is often, again, where the prefrontal cortex is quieting down. The rest of our brain is at rest, at relaxation. And then again, this is where those ideas come in. The second was while driving. So again, for a lot of us who have been driving for a number of years, this has become something that we're very familiar with, very comfortable with. Certainly when we're driving our own vehicle in areas we're quite familiar with. When you go to other areas, perhaps the levels of stress can increase. New drivers, this can be quite stressful when they're trying to figure out the vehicle and why people are honking at them, and why their parents are curled up in a fetal position next to them. So there's a lot of stress when it comes to trying to figure out the driving. But when you have done this for a number of years and it's become sort of second nature, again, the brain can go on autopilot, because it doesn't need to concentrate as much as if you were just learning out. So driving was the second thing that people were getting their best ideas. And then the third was actually exercising and or walking, which could be both indoors and outdoors. And so again, while exercising, you don't really need to map out what you're doing. Your brain can sort of go on autopilot. And again, this is where ideas were often formed. So I'd like to thank Ferris Bueller here for his assistance here today. But the idea here behind, exercising and walking is really a good transition to the second part of this piece, is really talking about the importance of having access to nature and getting outdoors and what that does to us in our bodies. And so really it's this whole idea is to alleviate stress, to find and develop better creative thoughts and ideas, and really just to be happier and healthier overall. There's just one thing we need to do. It's go outside. So the outdoors is something that us humans, we need it in three separate ways. The first being physically. And so there's a lot of research that's been done that suggests that living within a half mile of green spaces actually can lower the incidence of up to 15 diseases. And some of these include heart disease, diabetes, asthma, migraines. In the same research also suggested that living on tree-lined blocks is actually connected to a boost in both heart and metabolic health. And another study also found that people who are living close to green spaces actually have fewer stress hormones circulating in their blood, and that can actually lower illness and as well as mortality rates. And then what's also interesting is when we're in the outdoors, when we're experiencing the outdoors, there's certain smells that are called phytosides, and two examples are like pine and cedar. They have a very distinct smell, but the smelling of these phytosides can actually boost our immune system and actually help reduce stress levels. And so these things physically help us to feel better. From a mental standpoint, the outdoors can play a large role in this as well. So again, studies show that people who live within a half mile of green spaces actually have lower incidence of depression and anxiety. Long walks in nature can actually help to deactivate the part of your brain that controls negative thinking. And if you spend 90 minutes walking around in nature, you'll be less preoccupied by your personal problems and actually feel more connected to the people in the world around you. And then simply being in nature just a minimum of 5 hours a month, which you break it down, that's just really 10 minutes a day. It can actually make you feel happier overall. So from a mental standpoint, the outdoors plays a really important role. And then from a professional aspect, it can also assist in many ways. It can actually, being in nature can actually help increase our cognitive function, our attention skills. It can actually increase our short-term memory. Obviously, it can help us with creativity and new ideas, and then also with creative problem solving. So being in nature and having access to nature is a really important element to us as humans and why we need it. So we talked a little bit before about, where we spend our time and how much time, the majority of time we spend indoors. It's interesting to understand, like, where is time being spent? And so this graph kind of starts to break it down. And so between the in residence and other indoor locations and in a vehicle or an office or a factory or a bar or a restaurant, it's only showing that we're spending about 8% of our time outdoors. And so what's kind of scary is over 90% of our time is really being spent indoors just because of the work that's being done. In years past, 100 years ago, more people worked outside and did things and were more active because they had to be, and maybe didn't have the technology or weren't using Facebook to stalk their exes, so it was more of spending time outdoors, being more active, and it was quite different. But because of modern technology and the advancements of how work and how we connect, it's easy to do it inside, but 90% of our time is spent indoors. So let's go back to that age math problem. I don't know if you remember. So taking your current age and multiply that by 0.9, here's the answer. So doing that, actually, the result, that number you get is the number of years spent indoors. I'll take a moment there to take a breath. Kind of scary. Yes, I know. Mine is well over 42 years. And so really scary. So yes, thank you, Kevin McAllister. It's a scary thing to think about, but here's an opportunity to change that and spend more time outdoors. So, you know, there's a lot of other things to think about when it comes to, you know, just even having access to nature or even extended views to nature. You know, happiness can be elevated much more just by spending 13 to 15 minutes either outdoors or having exposure to natural light. This is just enough to trigger the release of endorphins, or what's called happy hormones. And so there's interesting technology called biodynamic lighting that is put in place. Really, you know, if there are no windows, what do? How do you have exposure or access to natural light? Well, this recent technology can be put in place, and so what it does is it actually adjusts the lighting during the day for tone and illuminance. And so it'll change from morning to noon, afternoon, and into the evening. And so it starts to mimic natural sunlight conditions. And so this can obviously help regulate the circadian rhythm of the occupants of the space, which actually leads to improved mood and actually help us with our sleep, really regardless of your overall proximity to a window. So, you know, just by leveraging this technology, it can actually help us align our circadian rhythm better, so that we are taking advantage of that natural light. Stress relief. This was another interesting one. So we found that Swedish scientists introduced study participants to a stressful math task to stress them out, and it had nothing to do with the age thing that we did earlier, but any math task would be enough to stress me out. So I understand how these participants felt. When the participants are actually finished, the scientists then asked them to sit in a 3D virtual reality room that was designed with nature scenes and bird songs. And what they found was that the heart rates of the participants in that nature room actually returned to a more normal rate more quickly than those who were asked to sit in just a plain room. So the idea here is, again, being in nature can actually help with our heart rates and help us to relax faster than before. And then attention and performance. This is another interesting thing. So it's just simply gazing at something green, whether it's through a window, on a walk outside, or even maybe just on a screensaver. This can actually help improve attention and performance in the workplace. And another interesting thing that an element that's in nature that is really quite interesting, that we don't even recognize or sometimes realize why we're drawn to it, but it's these geometric repetitive patterns that exist. They're called fractals. And what we don't realize is that they're naturally soothing to our brains, and so they help us to relax. You may also think of these as a Jackson Pollock picture. He worked in this medium quite a bit, and a lot of his paintings you can see a lot of fractals elements in that. But these are found in nature, and these are just a few examples that I pulled. But it's another element that I think is quite interesting. Some other things that companies are starting to recognize is that, you know, people want to be outside and want to spend their days outdoors. So why not bring the outdoors or bring the indoors out and allow people to leverage the outdoors for work and collaboration. So it's a growing trend. It's been around for quite some time, but you know, there are some things to maybe consider or think about. So obviously, until we have wireless power, we still have the need to power up and plug in. So obviously, you want to provide access to individuals who need to plug in devices so that they can work. Maybe not all work needs to be on laptops or whatnot, but the idea of having access is important to that. Same with Wi-Fi. You know, having available Wi-Fi might be important for certain types of work, but again, not all work needs Wi-Fi. But again, it's a nice amenity to have, certainly when you are trying to work or collaborate outdoors. What's also, you know, something to consider and think about, certainly starting to get into this time of year, is that depending on where you live, where you work, you know, different parts of the regions can vary quite a bit. And you may want to take advantage or look at that in different ways to how to support work. So providing shade, whether it's from the glaring sun or the changes, unexpected changes in the weather. This can be quite challenging. So whether it's using furniture or even architectural elements, shade will really make it easier to work, certainly, especially in warmer climates that, shade can help quite a bit with that. Some other ideas here are things to think about. Weather-friendly furniture is really important. Really, no one wants to sit on a wet cushion because it rained the night before. I did that, didn't look good. Same with a fiery hot chair. Nobody wants to sit on that and quickly realize it's too hot. So the idea is having work appropriate furniture, work appropriate posture furniture, so that you provide choices with if people want to sit, perch, or even sit in a stool. This just gives people choice on where they want to work. And when it comes to choice, it's how do you provide different destinations for individuals to choose whether they want to connect with others and collaborate outside, or if they want to maybe just work alone and do their work in that way. So it's really what can you do to provide a variety for people to choose from. So it's about different options, both for individuals and groups that can really support the work that's needed. So it's just really giving a much needed break from working indoors. One quick example I wanted to show was something that we helped create for LinkedIn in California. In one of their buildings, they had access to the outdoors via large garage doors that they could open up. And so we actually helped to create this mobile working pod. And there's a number of different pods, and they were all set up a little bit differently, but this one was set up as more of a collaborative pod. Others were more of an individual working pod. But the idea here was that the employees could actually go and open up the door and roll these outside and use them for however long they needed, and then they could roll them back in and shut the door, and all was good. So it's really about bringing the indoors out and the outdoors in. So what happens when you can't have a rolling mobile pod or get outside as much? Well, the idea is perhaps you can bring some of the outdoors in, and doing so through biophilic design. So biophilic design, Stephen Keller was actually the one who first created this concept, and he described it as really an approach that seeks to fuse nature with architecture, not just inspiring natural design, but specifically affecting really how buildings and communities function. So some examples of biophilic design really start to include obviously windows and natural light, natural materials like wood or stone, different design elements that might be found in nature, bringing plants in, indoor water elements, or even having a living green wall. These things really all support biophilic design. And so what are some of the benefits behind biophilic design? Well, I'm glad you asked. So I'll just share here 3 today, but having live plants indoors can really help to improve air quality. They absorb carbon dioxide and actually emit more oxygen into the air. So in 2019, before obviously the pandemic changed a lot of how work is done and where work is done, Ambius Research, they conducted a survey of 1,000 different office workers in North America to explore office air quality concerns. And so some of their key findings actually include almost half of the workers at that time had taken a day off because of the poor quality of air in their office. It actually had made them ill at some point. And then the top 3 reported office air quality issues at that time that they found were poor air circulation, excessive dust, and the smell of chemicals. And then they also found that better air quality can actually result in productivity improvements of anywhere from 8 to 11%. So not a large percent, but obviously if you can help with increased or improved productivity by employees by simply changing the air quality and making it better, then obviously that's something really great to explore. The second benefit is we've talked quite a bit about this. People are more creative and productive through biophilic design. So this was a study that was done by the California Energy Commission on worker performance and the indoor environment. So again, some of their key findings was that in an increase in daylight illumination levels from 1 to 20 foot candles actually resulted in a 13% improvement in performance. And they also found that workers in call centers or contact centers, depending on how you want to refer to that, those who had a view to the outside were found to actually process calls anywhere from 7 to 12% faster versus those that did not have a view to the outside. And then finally, office workers were found to perform anywhere from 10 to 25% better on mental function and memory recall when they had a view to the outside versus, again, not having a view. So again, some interesting metrics there. And then finally, people they just feel happier and healthier, especially with having biophilic design elements. So this is an interesting approach that a lot of companies are starting to look into and do is this walk and talk, or walking meeting. So instead of sitting in that stuffy conference room and having people fall asleep or check their devices or just disconnect altogether, let's go for a walk and talk. And so some of the key benefits here, a simple 30-minute walk can actually really help to, again, dramatically reduce the risk of heart disease, colon cancer, breast cancer, dementia. I mean, and there's just a number of health benefits just by being more active can be. And then I think these meetings can also really help to increase and maintain employee engagement. So it helps to, put those electronic devices away so that you don't accidentally run into something, but it's more about keeping people engaged and having a better dialogue. And then simply, this was interesting from Stanford, found in a study that walking can actually boost a person's creative output by an average of 60%. And that was walking both indoors or outdoors. So I'll often remind, some of my design teams that, if you're struggling with a design problem or looking for a creative solution, time to stand up, time to walk away, and switch, task switching in your brain. Go for a walk, get outside if you can. But oftentimes when you can come back to that problem, you'll often will find a solution a little bit faster than if you were just to sit and try to muddle through it. So with that, I want to thank you. I will turn it over now to Jessica and Amy. So thanks, guys.
Elizabeth, are you able to pull it back up? Thank you. Well, thank you, John. That was wonderful. My husband's actually a neuroscientist, so now I feel like I can talk to him more about this kind of thing. So that was awesome. So we're going to kick into the occupant health pillar and just a brief overview, and then we'll move into like the specifics of the 2 mind optimizations that we have. And Amy and I will be tag teaming that throughout this. So the occupant health pillar, or the Cincinnati Healthy Building pillar, however you want to phrase it, was created because, as John mentioned, we spend a lot of our time indoors, and the pandemic only brought to light the importance of a healthy interior environment. And we created this pillar in conjunction with the International Well Building Standard and IWBI, as well as the Community Health Needs Assessment that was created by the Health Collaborative locally. So we paired the WELL standard, which has 10 categories and like 108 optimizations, down to a select few that we felt were really critical and important to impacting Cincinnati. So we really refined it in that way. We go to the next slide, please. So the Occupant Health Guide has 7 healthy building categories and 14 optimizations. And we are asking our members to pick 7 of them by 2030 to implement. And we're gonna, like I said, briefly go through them. The guide, there's a full guide that you can find on the 2030 district website. There's a whole healthy building district link, as you can see there. And I'm sure someone can send it in the chat if you need that. That has the full report and a 1-pager, as well as the official report of the launch that is way more in depth than I can go into today in our time that we have left. So if we move on, please. Like we mentioned, we worked with professional partners, members, local health insurance data, and nonprofit and government agencies to arrive at this pillar. We, like I said, worked with Community Health Needs Assessment, the International Well Building Institute, as well as many members and professional partners and community partners to really refine this. It took, I think, on average, 2.5 to 3 years to get to where we are now. And it's a living document. It's, we're learning things every day. So if you continue, please. And so from that Community Health Needs Assessment, we found there were 5 key health concerns that they established in that document for Cincinnati. It's redone every 3 years, so actually they're preparing to launch the next round of this Community Health Needs Assessment, so we will kind of see if anything has changed. But the 5 that we've picked, of the optimizations, you can see here, we've kind of paired them with these health concerns that they identified in this document. We have 7 categories of air, water, nourishment, mind, light, materials, and movement. And there are 14 optimizations that pair with those. And we're going to be doing deep dives over the course of, the next year or so into each of these, but we're starting with mind, which is today. So if we move on, please. And just briefly to explain why we picked these. There's a whole bunch of data and information we sifted through, and you can see that in the report. We picked air because good air quality increases productivity and reduces respiratory disease. Water, poor water quality can lead to gastrointestinal illness and neurological disorders. Light is a main driver of circadian systems, supporting our alertness and sleep cycles. Nourishment, because proper nourishment increases mental clarity and productivity. Mind, because the built environment can mitigate adverse cognitive health outcomes by supporting mental health, and we're diving more into that today. Chemicals and building materials can be harmful, often causing headaches and respiratory issues along with others, so we picked materials. And movement, because regular movement increases mental clarity and decreases sick days. So if we continue on, please. So within the guide, there's a whole checklist, and each optimization has a whole section dedicated to what is required and how you submit that to the 23rd district to prove that you've done it. And there's also this handy dandy checklist, which you can pick the ones that you're going to achieve, and how you're going to do that. And we can move on to the next one. It's on to Amy.
Yeah, perfect. So at our launch, we asked our members and those in the audience of which of these categories was potentially the one they wanted to know most about through a quick survey. And mine very quickly bubbled to the top. And I think it's partly because the world that we're living in right now, partly because of the stresses that are on us every day and that are continuing to change. So as we continue on, as Jessica said, we'll continue to deep dive into this, but I think what people really are looking for is how to start utilizing the guide. So through these deep dive sessions, we're trying to add a little bit of the science, kind of inviting John in to talk about some of what's impacting us every day, but then we also want to talk a little bit about how can you actually begin to implement these things into your own spaces. So mental health is certainly not something that we're all a foreign concept to all of us, but having good mental health is really not just the absence of having a health condition, right? So we want to make sure that we're thinking about mental health as truly a whole person's well-being and how space can truly impact you and how we can adapt space so that you can have the best and most productive work environment so that you can achieve all of the things that John said in terms of productivity and happiness and health. So focusing in on the optimizations, Jessica and I will share some examples of how through our own work, we've been able to achieve these different ideas of restorative spaces and enhanced access to nature into workspaces here in Cincinnati or in the region. So those are just some ideas. Certainly not the only ideas of how you can implement these things in space. But as we start to look at restorative space, what we're really talking about is finding an opportunity within your environment to provide spaces dedicated for relaxation and restoration. So just have some thought starters here on the left, taking a look at your existing space. What do you already have in your environment? You might have things that already really fall into this category and you don't necessarily need to do much else. If you don't have these spaces, where could you repurpose and kind of carve out these new spaces for your employees? what kinds of things might need to change, how could you better support your team? Not every team functions the same way. So really kind of looking at your staff, looking at the people that are utilizing your facility and trying to think about what does restoration mean to them? And how can we start to put these types of spaces that they need into the environment? And then encouraging use is also extremely important. Putting a restorative mindful space within the environment and not helping people understand how to use it and that it's encouraged that you use it is also half the battle in terms of change management. It's a great amenity, but if people feel odd utilizing those amenities, it really doesn't benefit us in any way. So just this first example, this is kind of a larger example where this company was going all in. This idea of sanctuary was a part of the story from the beginning, and really something that meant a lot to them and became part of their success criteria for the overall project. We don't hear this a lot, so I thought this was a good one to show. But this idea of creating respite spaces was important because of the work that these folks were doing. They're taking really hard calls on a daily basis about people's mental and physical health. And sometimes those calls can be extremely stressful, extremely depressing. So giving people this opportunity to kind of take a breath, step back from their space and kind of recharge within the environment became really important. Elizabeth, you can go to the next one. So through this work, we really thought about who again is using this environment, the different types of folks that were there, from visitors to the employees, how they were going to utilize the space and move through the space, and where we could best create these little areas for employees as a give back. So again, because it was part of that strategic vision from the front, it was really something that it was easy to carve out those spaces as we were working through the design. If there was pushback, we could kind of remind the team, hey, this is a really important thing and it's part of our success criteria. So we're going to make sure that we're creating a welcoming experience. We're reserving those areas for respite. In this one, we were able to dedicate an entire floor to that employee experience, kind of focusing on opportunities to kind of get away from that individual workspace, either be alone, as John said, or be together. Both of those can be opportunities for respite and restoration. So here we've got a fountain, kind of bringing in those natural sounds, access to natural light, gaming areas, food service, and then those opportunities for some quiet space as well.
And I'm going to show a really small room level example of our restorative space. This is MA Architect Columbus office respite room. So this is just a tiny little space that they carved out within the existing office that was a refuge for employees to recollect oneself, take a break from the workday, like we talked about. And in this case, all items are red list free, which basically means it has no toxic materials or chemicals in it. And most of them also have declare labels, which is like an ingredients list. And so everything in here is picked very intentionally, providing adaptable light, soft seating, weighted blankets, essential oils, sound machines, eye masks. There's a whole bunch of things in this room that's not very large that allows our employees to get away and escape. We go to the next slide. This is just some other close-up examples of what it looks like. People are encouraged to, sit back, relax, take a little nap if they need to. And, it's a really wonderful space. We're expanding soon, so we're finally getting our own one in Cincinnati, and I'm excited. So if we move on to the next one. So moving on to the concept of enhanced access to nature. Key things to think about when you're looking at this optimization is what type of space type do you have? Are you having private office or meeting spaces? Do you have high paneled workstations? What are your exterior windows located, and are they visible to most space users? Do you have indoor greenery strategy? And what opportunities are there to improve access to nature through exterior views and or other indoor strategies? As we mentioned, a key part of this in this document is to provide a combination of indoor plants, water features, and or views comprising of natural areas. It's really working on like the workstations and regularly occupied spaces is what we're focusing on in our guide. If we move to the next slide, this is an example of an MA project with the OSU College of Nursing. And so it's a renovation and expansion. It's currently under construction, which is why these are renderings, and I don't have wonderful photos yet. But mental health is really a big important aspect of this design as well. All regularly occupied spaces have views of nature and plants integrated throughout. And if, this project is also pursuing LEED Platinum and WELL Platinum as well. So if you go to the next slide, this is very high level because we're running out of time, but this is some example that even like office spaces, places where people can gather, nature and access to daylight and views is really important part of this design. And I will kick it over to Amy for the next example.
Yeah, so we just had some images in here. John talked a little bit about biophilic design. Elizabeth, if you want to go to the next slide. Let's had some additional examples of bringing some of that greenery into your office spaces, providing those views to the exterior. John talked a lot about these kinds of concepts. And I know everyone thinks about, well, I can't put a green wall in my office, and certainly everyone can't. And so there are lots of other ways of bringing greenery in, whether it's through potted plants. It doesn't even have to be true live plants. It won't get you the air quality, but just the view of greenery is important as well if you can't get those views outside. You can go to the next one. The last one's just an easy example of a floor plan. One of the criteria for submitting for this optimization is just a representational floor plan. So here you can see this is a P&G office space. This type of planning concept is not new. It's been going on for 20 plus years, but kind of pulling those private office and enclosed spaces off the windows where they traditionally used to be, and really truly we're blocking all of the natural light to the priority or the majority of the users in this space. So just flip-flopping that idea, again, nothing new, but kind of giving those people in their office space the prime views, the prime access to those windows, and then pulling all those other spaces more towards the interior. Here we're showing a lot of buffer zones, still giving you the opportunity for privacy, those bump zones where people can kind of come out of those meeting spaces or out of those office areas, collide and collaborate. Just a different kind of thing, but essentially this would be all we'd be looking for in terms of optimization for this credit. And with that, we can open the floor to questions if anyone has. I know a couple of people have put some in the chat, which John has already answered. So, and it looks like we all need to start mowing our lawns more. So seems like that's the best idea generator.
Please feel free to unmute yourself and ask any questions you might have. Amy and Jessica, if you want to share any of the trends that you've been seeing just recently. I know you just shared one about how pulling the workstations to the front. I'm just wondering if there's any other trends that you've recently seen.
I would say a lot of the trends right now are actually related to people returning to the office in a safe manner that people feel comfortable with. So I think a lot of things that we're talking about and we'll probably talk about in future deep dives is around air quality, which John hit on, cleanability of surfaces, proximity to others, and how do you continue to meet safely? I think one of those is those outdoor spaces and providing people a little bit more buffer between each other, but still finding those opportunities to bring people together. I'm sure there's lots, but those are just a few of the things. That the only other thing I'd say is just a kind of a redistribution of space, continued kind of transition from those individual focused areas to team, right? So people have figured out that they don't have to come into the office as much. It's not a dedicated place. It's not the only place that work can happen, right? So we're able to kind of transition that and utilize office spaces in a little bit of a different way. And mostly we're seeing that as driving collaboration for the most part.
That's great.
I don't have, I think just in general, the importance of occupant health has been really prominent lately, and a lot of clients are seeking ways to include that in their projects in whatever way they can. And Amy listed a whole bunch of wonderful things that, I'm trying to think of one that you didn't list, but I think you did a great job listing it. So I think it's just in general, like it's a trend right now and it's a big thing. not just for people within the 2030 district, but it's a really prevalent concept of making healthy office spaces and healthy buildings. And it was big before, but the pandemic really kind of brought it to light and gave it even more prominence in our everyday designs and kind of best practice anymore, you know, in some capacities, right? It's, if you don't do it, it's like, why aren't you thinking about making a healthy space? So I think that's my answer to that question.
Yeah, and if I can just, I mean, obviously we're here to talk about the healthy guide. I think people are looking for ways of telling the story of how they're changing their office space and making improvements for the better of their employees and their building occupants, right? So not everybody is able to do a full well building or a full LEED building or a Fitwell or whatever the certification platforms are that people are interested in. So here locally, this gives us opportunity to take a look at our own spaces, make some changes where we're able to, and really have something tangible to show our employees of, you know, this is what's important to us and what we can actually achieve in our office space in a way that you're able to capture that story really easily. And I think just having that opportunity is important because people want to know what people are doing and that the spaces that they're working in are safe.
Well, that's a really great point. I want to stay on time here, so I really appreciate John, Jessica, and Amy speaking today and sharing the presentations that you all offered. I also want to invite everybody to join for 6th of October for an event that's part of the 2030 District Summit. And then we will have another health event on the 4th of November, which will be incorporated with green drinks, and that'll be hosted at Enriching Spaces. So I am really happy to see everybody here today. Those were great presentations, and we will all see you next time.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.